Hi guys, welcome to the Dad Bub Show. I'm one of your hosts, Ken Blowfield, and Brendo and I, we interview dads all over the world to find out their secrets on balancing how to be a high-performing dad and a high performer in life too. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Hey guys, welcome back to the Dad Bub Show. I'm your host, Ken Blowfield, and typically, Brenda and I, we have a guest on show and we interview someone absolutely amazing and epic, and we share their story in terms of what it's like being a father, how to balance a high-performing life, and of course, how to do it whilst being a high-performing dad too. But on this show today, I'm taking over the reins and it's just me, and I'm going to show you, or I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what my experience is like trying to be a high-performing dad and being a high performer in life too. Now, if you notice, I'm in a little bit of a different backdrop today. Typically, I have those beautiful photos of my family behind you. If you tune into the videos, you would see them typically. If you don't, then you would know in the recording, sometimes we talk about it. We see the background, and there's some pictures of my wife and my beautiful son, Nate. Now, today, we've taken them down. We've put them some other place in the house, and we don't know what we're going to be putting here. So, guys, stay tuned. The podcast room here at our house may be changing locations. We may be moving the room up and making this permanent, bigger space, Nate's playroom. So, without further ado, let's tune in to a little bit of the intro. So, guys, if you don't know me, my name is Ken Blowfield. I'm the host, or one of the hosts of the Dad Bub Show. And what we try to do is we try to help educate people in terms of how to be better dads, but more importantly, how to be better dads whilst also maintaining a high-performing life too. And that dichotomy of balancing being a high performer in both what you do and what your calling is, and your passion, your vision, and your values as a human being on this planet, i.e., what you're placed on this earth to do. And then, of course, trying to do that by bettering the future of tomorrow by raising an amazing family and being a superstar dad too. So that's a really difficult thing, but really a little bit about me, because I don't really talk about me much on the show. It's always about the host, and Brendo and I are always trying to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty, the understanding in terms of what these high performers, the high performing superstars out there are doing, and what we can implement in our lives. But I'm going to share you a little bit about the stuff that I do, and I'm going to share you a little bit about my story. So first up, who am I? Well, look, I'm a guy who's typically been somewhat entrepreneurial all my life. And what do I mean by that? Well, I started off really, really young. When I was in primary school, I used to hustle CDs to my friend and sell them for a profit. I used to get these 256 megabyte CDs, and I mean, call this scamming. This is actually probably a scam. Don't tell anyone. I used to tell them, right? Because back in the day, it might not have been 256 megabytes, could be 125 megabytes, whatever they were. But typically when we used to burn CDs, and if you don't know what that reference is, that is essentially getting songs that you might download from LimeWire or you might have from another CD and putting it on a duplicate CD. Right. And the reason you would do that is so that, if you go traveling, you could take the duplicate CD and not damage the original CD. Or it might be the sense that you've got the music that you've downloaded or purchased online on your computer, and you want to put it on a CD so you can listen to it in the car, something like that. Now, what my friends used to have an issue with was they weren't able to ever download or put more than 5 or 6 songs onto a CD because the CD-ROM couldn't actually handle that size. So what I used to tell them a little bit of a fib. I used to say to them, I can get actually 10, 15, sometimes even 20 songs on a CD because I know how to double, triple the size of a CD-ROM. Now, naturally, I didn't know how to do that. What I just knew how to do was to decrease the size of the actual song itself. So if the song was like 50 megs, I could make it 25 megs. So like I could do things like that. So what I used to sell them, I used to take their CD. They used to give me the 256 megabyte CD or whatever the size of that CD was, and I would put 10 to 20 songs on it, and I would burn it and give it to them, and I would charge $10, $15, $20 for it, something like that. So that was like my first, I suppose, experience of being let's call a hustler or an entrepreneur maybe. And then as I went on, in high school, I started selling customized barley made bands. So my friend Sam Shannon, we used to be in entrepreneurial class or business class together in high school. And we thought of a cool idea is he was going to Bali. He had a connection in Bali who could get us these customized bands on them that used to say things like Rusty, Rip Curl, Billabong. By the way, if I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't have done that because that's trademark infringement. We're actually using the logo of some other company and putting it on a brand on a wrist, a bangle, and selling it off. So technically illegal. Again, we were in high school. We didn't know these things. We were selling them, or we were selling to our high school friends out on the streets, out on the markets. In fact, I probably still have some around in the house. I know I stumbled across a few a couple of years ago. So they were really, really cool. And that was a little hustling exercise of, actually two of my friends. So Sam Shannon and James DeLima, two really, really great people that I love and cherish very, very dearly, because they were really the cornerstone of my entrepreneurial journey to what I am today. And then later on in my high school years, a lot of my friends, and I was really heavily into fitness, health, and strength, and I can talk about that on a different episode, but a lot of my friends and colleagues, and in fact, even my teachers, used to recognize this and actually used to ask me for advice. And I actually started selling training programs and nutrition programs to my friends and giving teachers advice in this realm as well. Again, was I qualified? Probably not at definitely not at that period of time in my life. But what I was ready for the hustle. It's like people were asking me questions. It's like, why not give them the answers? And if they're coming to me again and again and again and they're getting results, why not charge for that knowledge or that service as well? And that's what I was pretty much doing. So that was me really hustling my way through primary school and high school. And from that, it really kind of laid the foundation of me being, let's call it a quote unquote entrepreneur. And the reason I'm using that quote unquote with the finger sign abbreviations, right, the inverted commas entrepreneur, is because entrepreneur is as a buzzword everybody uses these days, and I think it's more about like, what do you do and how do you impact the society and the world around you, which really determines if you're someone providing or placing impact on this world or not. Because you can have a business, if you're in Australia, you can have an ABN, or if you're in the US, or you can have an ACN in Australia, you can have a proprietary limited company, you could have a trust. Okay, in the US, you can have you can have your company setups over there, and like an enterprise and things like that. But it doesn't actually make you an entrepreneur. It just means that you have a business. I think there's a very, very clear deciphering difference between a business owner and entrepreneur, and I might explain that a little bit later. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think a lot of people can be a business owner, but not a lot of people are entrepreneurs. And in my early years, I think you could have saw I was just kind of going from hustle idea to idea and trying to make something of myself. And I think that is an entrepreneur. I think trying to find what works for you and providing an impact to society is, in my opinion, my definition of an entrepreneur. A business owner is just someone who has a business. It makes money, makes a profit, turns over, they make money, they put it in their pocket, and they live a happy life. That's a business owner, right? Like my wife's father, my father-in-law, amazing businessman, right? Started from, bought his dad's company, made it into something absolutely sensational, where he was exporting timber all over the world to the global landscape, Japan, the US, to Sweden, all of these amazing places. And, because of that, he had a, $60 million turnover business, like very, very profitable, very, very good business, right? And at one point he had the largest timber mill in Australia, certainly Western Australia. And so, but when I look at his journey through his life as a business owner, it's like, cool, his father was in timber. So he then purchased the timber from his father and made furniture and had a furniture store. He also obviously imported furniture from other furniture makers and sold furniture, right? And then from there, he saw an opportunity where his father was selling up his business. He then jumped on that opportunity and bought that business and grew that business. Now, is he an entrepreneur in the sense? Sure. But I would look at that as like, he stayed on one lane and done it extremely well. And I'd look at that as a business owner. If you compare him to, say, someone like Elon Musk, it's Elon Musk is like PayPal. Then let's do something completely different. Let's start Tesla. Then let's start something completely different. Let's do SpaceX. Then let's do something completely different and do that bricks company, or the boring brick company. So it's like, that's an entrepreneur. It's like all these amazing ideas, and how can I impact the world in a positive way by doing multiple things and doing multiple things well. That's my definition of an entrepreneur. Not to say that a business owner or an entrepreneur, one of the other is better or worse. It's just like me to put myself in the classification of that quote unquote entrepreneur. If I'm circling back to what I was speaking about earlier, it's like, am I someone who really lays an impact for society by doing multiple different ventures? I don't yet think so. I think, yes, I have tried and attempted, and I'm trying to still attempt and become an entrepreneur that I am proud to call myself that. By providing impact and providing value to society. Yes, most certainly. But have I done that yet? I'm not too sure. That's my hesitation. That's why I have the quote unquotes, just in case anyone knows. So what am I then a quote unquote entrepreneur about? What are the companies that I have? Well, my wife and I have a company called Kristen Bertolini Designs, Bertolini being my wife's maiden name. I told her to keep that when she created her company because Bertolini is just such a sexier name than Blowfield, right? My dad, I know he listens to these podcasts, so I'm so sorry, Dad. I love you very, very dearly, but our surname, just not sexy, right? Blowfield. Don't know where that came from. I know my dad is British, and I know typically the British surnames come from an act that they performed back in the day. So a smith was a blacksmith, so I don't want to even think what Blowfield was. I'll leave that for your imagination. Now, Bertolini, though, is such a sexy name, and people are just drawn to it. And so when we've started growing Kristen's business, and like she's multiple six figures per year now, and we should we'll probably hit the 7-figure mark by mid 2023, I would think. By the way in which she's growing, the way we're kind of scaling out, and she's doing this whilst being a full-time mum, and we're managing this very, very successfully. So like, there's some cool stuff there. So that's one business, right? So what do? We focus on creative design, creative branding. We focus on PR and exposure, really helping people to improve their PPA, which is their presence, their positioning, and their authority, so they can actually scale and grow their business. That's something really, really important to us. Another business that I have is with my cousin, my dear, beautiful, amazing cousin, and her partner, so Cassandra and Tyson. We have a company called Audience where we try to help people get rid of the techie components of what it's like to run a podcast and help them do it for them. Now, my business partner Tyson is an audio engineer, so he is all in the works when it comes to audio and making sure it sounds crisp and amazing. My cousin Cassie is so amazing at operations and making sure that people do the job to get the outcome that we want. And myself, obviously being skilled in marketing and sales, I know how to market a podcast and sell the podcast. But the problem is we obviously have to work together to make that outcome happen, and we're doing it pretty well, I would think, at this present point in time. That's a newish business. And what are the other things that I'm doing? Well, I'm working very closely with a very, very good friend of mine, Kim Barrett, who runs a company called Your Social Voice, and I'm a business coach, mentor, and sales advisor for that business as well. So there's a few things that we've got in the pipes, and we got a few things coming up in 2023 that we are soon to announce as well. So stay tuned for that. So that's a little bit about me. Now let's talk about like my journey as a father and a dad, because I know the people that listen and tune in, being a father and a dad is a difficult task, and really kind of really working out what are your responsibilities as a father. I think we're moving into a generation, a period of time right now where it's very interesting, because my idea of a father is different from, so my idea of what I needed my father to do is extremely different from what I expect myself to be as a father for my son today. And what I mean by that is, well, when I think back to my childhood, it's like I needed my dad to be a provider. I needed my dad to be a butch, manly man that gardened, that built things, that showed me all the tools, like all those types of butch, manly man responsibilities that is kind of perceived as a typical father in the late 80s, early 90s, and obviously clearly before that as well. But now we're moving into a society, it's like, and by the way, in relation to that, I expected my father. There was an expectation my father went to work every single day to provide for the family, because that was the concept of normality back then. And maybe that is actually the poor and middle class mentality. It's like, I came from a middle class family. We were very, very wealthy in assets. We had, I think at one point, Dad had over 100 homes, something crazy like that. But so wealthy in assets, but poor in cash, because all of our cash was stored in assets. So when from a cash perspective, we were probably middle class, maybe upper or maybe middle class. I'd say middle class. And so my mentality was like, work hard, buy assets. You pay more for those assets, so essentially negatively gear it, which I'm not a fan of today, but negatively gear it, and then you pay money, and obviously, hopefully, that capital appreciates over time, whilst you're getting a small rental yield. That obviously doesn't pay for the mortgage, so you got to put money into that. So you get capital appreciation, which you can then borrow against and use that as the deposit for the next home, and that compounds over time, and you amass this wealth and portfolio. And that was my mentality of what I needed my father to be at the time of my life, because that's what I saw as, successful, I suppose. But that was a middle class mentality. Now, as I suppose I've broken down the middle class mentality, I hang out with a lot of, let's call them rich folk or rich people, or people very wealthy, both from an asset perspective and a cash perspective. I now look at life a little bit different. Who do I need to be as the man for my son tomorrow? It's like I need to be a man that provides, but that is also present. I need to be a man that provides, but isn't always away. I need to be a man that provides, that understands the tools that my son needs to understand for tomorrow, but not necessarily for today. So my dad, for example, spent a lot of time taking me to parks and running around and doing those amazing things. Perfect. That's what I needed as a dad. But then I see a lot of dads teaching their sons and daughters skill sets, like potentially, I don't know, pulling apart a CD, I don't know, a boombox, then putting it back together. Is that a fantastic exercise? Yes. Teachers fine motor skill. Love that. Teachers, obviously, problem solving. That's one of my favorite things as a father to teach, problem solving. But it's like the question is the kid ever going to use that CD device ever again, that boombox? Do they need it deconstructed to construct it again? It's like, is there better things that they can teach? Maybe like a computer. Maybe like understanding, like, I don't know, cryptocurrencies versus fiat currencies, understanding the investment market, and understanding or problem solving how you can get a return that compounds over time more effectively than the stock market. Something like that, right? Like if you put $100 in the S&P and the S&P compounds typically at 8% per year every single year, it's like, how can you strategize? How can you problem solve? This is what I want to teach, Nate. How can you problem solve and strategize a better return with the same amount of risk? Right? And there are 12%. If you look at the cryptocurrency markets, there's like 40%. And is that safe? I don't know. It's like, cool, let's mitigate this risk. Let's do the numbers. And they're the type of skill sets that I want to teach my son. So it's I think it's interesting looking at the differences between my expectation as a father when I was young versus my expectation of a father now that I am a father. What are the things that I want to teach my son so that he is prepared for the world tomorrow? I don't care about today. Right? Because today I am here for him today. I need him to be there and present for me tomorrow because I'm not going to be able to do the things that he's able to do in the future. Right? But also more importantly, it's like if I only teach him the skills that he needs to survive today, then he won't have the skills that he needs to survive for tomorrow. And remember, today is the present, and I'm here, and I'm able to kind of help with everything. I'm providing the money. I can provide the comfort, the emotional connection, the love, the support. He doesn't need to focus on that. He needs to focus on, like, what are the skill sets that he needs to succeed in the world tomorrow, because the world tomorrow is going to be a vastly different place than it is today. Because if you think about it, when I think about the world when I grew up in the 90s to what it is now, it's like, wow, crazily different. When I think about my father's childhood, when I see pictures, I'm like, that's crazy. That is so different. In fact, I was speaking to my mother, my beautiful mum, yesterday in terms of my auntie, my amazing auntie. She practically raised me every single weekend. She was absolutely sensational. She's a saint. And her husband, who was from Holland, his name was John. I used to call him Pa. His name was John. I think it was his mother. I think. Could have been his grandmother. I don't know. I think, yeah, it has to be his grandmother. His grandmother lived with them for a period of time until her passing. Or maybe it was his mum. I can't recall. I know because my cousin called her Omar, so maybe it was Omar in Dutch is grandmother. So it must have been my Uncle John's mother. And she had schizophrenia, and I didn't realize that as a young kid. I just palmed it off. But my mum shared it to me. I was like, oh, it's crazy. And she's like, yeah, it's from the war. And I was like, from the war. That is so abstract to me, so far beyond me. I can't even fathom being in a war. But there are wars happening right now. There's one in the Ukraine, right? I know it's political. I don't want to get into it, but I know it's a political reasons, and the US and Russia, no one's in the right there, in my opinion. And then, of course, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq and all of the Middle East. It's like there's wars happening all the time. It's just because we're cushioned here in Australia that we haven't seen war, and that's a pretty interesting thing to be aware of. It's like there are people out there that are still struggling from war times and currently struggling right now from war that's happening today that we don't even realize. And then that made me think, it's like, oh, wow, shit. Because, the way I'm trying to father my son is obviously to not be aware of wars and not even consider wars a possibility, but it's very strongly a possibility because it's happened only 80 years ago in our lifetime, thereabouts. I'm just guessing. It's still currently happening in other countries around the world right now. It's like, well, shit. Your ability to father has to be dependent on the world around you. But if I'm teaching my son the skill set to be to fight the problems today, cool, well, that's war. But then when war is over, because eventually it will inevitably be over, it's like, then what does he have tomorrow? Because after every single war, we've seen lots of famine, we've seen lots of poor, we've seen lots of death because people don't have the skill set to manage with the future of tomorrow that is a world without war. So now I'm thinking to my lifetime now, it's like, what's happening right now in the world that probably won't be there tomorrow? Because my son doesn't need to know any of that. He needs to understand that it's happened, but doesn't need to have the skill set to manage it. He needs to have the skill set to manage the problems that he's going to face tomorrow. And I think that as a father, it's like I have to try to work through that. So I don't want to continue to babble, but I want to list a couple of honorable mentions to my childhood growing up, and I think that I'm trying to replicate be an amazing father like my dad was. Even though my mother and my father broke up and split up, and then my dad, he was in Perth for a period of time, and then he shot off to the other side of the country. He was still an amazingly present father, right? So I want to do a couple honorable mentions. Like number one, and of course I'm just going to primarily mention my father here because I think my mother is obviously amazing. She knows I love her absolutely deeply, but this is the Dad Bub Show, and I want you to be present and aware to me understanding what I am grateful for as a father now for my father who was my father when I was growing up and still obviously is. But number one, my dad would work nights every night to provide food for us all the time, but not only think about today, i.e. put money on the table today for food today. It's like, he was always thinking, how can I amass wealth for your futures tomorrow and create generational wealth for his grandkids, i.e. my son today. He would have succeeded as well if it hadn't been for the divorce, but that's a different story. So I really, really commend my father for that. It's like he was always thinking about tomorrow, which is what I'm always thinking about. It's like, yes, we need to solve the problems of today, but then how can we solve the problems of tomorrow also? Like my son doesn't need to solve the problems of today. That's what I do. He just needs to solve the problems of tomorrow, right? That's what I'm getting at with this podcast. But so my dad was always thinking about the problems of today, but also really, really thinking deep about the problems of tomorrow. So much so it ended his marriage, right? So much so he wasn't present enough with my mum, so it ended the marriage essentially, right? So that's what I really, really appreciated my dad. He's always thinking about tomorrow to try to help us and better his children and his children's children, right? Always thinking about generational wealth. And my dad is actually a geek when it comes to wealth generation or wealth creation. Secondly, right, my father would, obviously, like I said, work nights, have like a 3-hour nap, and then take us to parks, take us to school, pick us up from school. He would take us out for lunches. He would take us out for dinners. He would take us out for snacks. He would make us food. I'm not saying the best culinary cuisines on the planet. God, no, Dad was a shit cook. But he always tried. And he was always overtired, but he did a fantastic job with the situations that he placed himself in, right? And I'm saying that very, very consciously. He placed himself in that situation. He didn't need to work nights. He chose to work nights. He could have put us in daycare, but he didn't want to do that. So he worked nights so he didn't have to do that. Right. So by the way, they're kind of things. So I just want to kind of touch on what I've gone on so far. So wealth creation for tomorrow, obviously taking us out and doing experiences all the time. There was one thing that my father always asked me when he picked me up every single time. Could have been from a friend's house, could have been from school, wherever. It was like, what did you learn today? I always say, I don't know, Dad. But every single time he said that, it always made me think. I'd always give the same old response. I don't know, Dad. Nothing, Dad. And he'd always say, really? Nothing? Tell me more. Right? He'd try to open me up, which was really good. But it always got me thinking in the back of my head. And I actually use this today with every single person I see, right? My nephews, not my son yet because he's only 1.5, but Kristen, it's like, what did you learn today? How was your day? What did you learn? What were the things that you took away from today that are going to help you for the problems that you're going to face tomorrow? It's like I wouldn't have those questions with my arsenal, in my quiver, to ask people, to open them up on these types of conversations if my dad didn't spark that. So I'm really, really grateful for my dad for asking me that, because if you don't reflect, because that's actually secretly what he's teaching me, reflecting on your day so that you can then solve the problems of that day for the problems that you'll face tomorrow. again, you can see where I'm circling with this conversation, right? You can understand that a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about today is all about how you can problem solve for today and tomorrow. So I want to take you to my third point that my fourth point that I think my dad was absolutely amazing for, right? So obviously, number one, wealth creation for tomorrow. Number two, obviously, working nights and always doing things with us, activities with us. And number three, obviously, always asking us to think about a reflection of the day for tomorrow. And then the fourth thing I think he was really good about was, although he was shit about, so and it never actually worked. You never stuck in. But Dad always tried to get us to say something good about ourselves. Are you proud of this? What are you proud of? What do you think you're really proud of? What are you happy with? What did you do really well? It's like always trying to get us to open up and self-affirm our skill set or what we're proud of. Unfortunately, through Dad's negative self-talk, that rubbed off on us. And so Dad would have negative self-talk about his body, how he wasn't generating enough wealth, his relationship, us kids that we were fucking around too much. My dad's swear word of choice when we were growing up was bullshit. But where I'm going at there, it's like, although his intentions were good, because of his actions, his intentions didn't count. But I appreciate it now because it's now something that I'm aware of now with Nate. It's like I can't have negative self-talk around him about anything. Should be positive self-talk about me. It's like I can keep my negative self-talk to myself, but I shouldn't allow him to see my negative self-talk, right? Because I want him to positively affirm the things that he does well so that it strives him to do better and that he's grateful, right? So self-affirmations and obviously gratitudes are super powerful for anyone. It's like you've seen the movie where he's there and he's like, I'm incredible, I'm powerful, I'm strong. It's like those types of words, saying that over and over and over again, creates massive impact and trajectory in your life if you do it right. But of course, you can't just say it, you also have to mean it. And when you mean it, you also have to feel it. And if you do it repetitively over time, eventually you will say it with meaning and you will say it with impact and you will say it with motivation. So that's all powerful. And then the last final thing, the fifth thing that my dad did extremely well that I'm really extremely grateful for, he always spoke about better days tomorrow. Right. So my dad really actually never took us on. Oh, he took us on a lot of holidays and trips like around the country, or around the state. But he always spoke about better days tomorrow. And although this is a mindset of the poor, i.e., hope for better days tomorrow, just the conversation about it always motivated us to strive harder. And I know it motivated him to strive harder today to get to where he wanted to be tomorrow. And for me, it's like, cool, now I'm going to strive for myself harder and stronger and faster and meaner today so that I can be better for tomorrow. But that doesn't mean neglecting the present, because of course that can detriment your marriage, your relationships, and all the other successes that you can have today. So those are the 5 things that I'm really, really grateful for my father. But we're coming to the end of the podcast today. And like every single podcast, there are 2 questions that we always ask to close it off. So Brenda would always ask, typically the question, Ken, how do you take care of your health and fitness? Naturally, Ken and I, we met in the fitness industry, and that's why we're so close today and doing this, and we're on the same journey together, blah, 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 blah. That's what Brenda would say. So how do I keep healthy and fit? Well, to be quite honest with you, since I've had Nate, I've been very, very slack. And even quite honestly with you, since COVID, I have been extremely slack. Always been consciously aware about health and fitness, but I just haven't been. And if you know my backstory, you know I've had gyms in the past and been very, very motivated in that arena. But I've been very slack since COVID and since having Nate, so I've really let myself go. But I'm sure you're very, very happy to know that I've buddied up with a good friend of mine, Tim Frey from Helix Sports Performance, one of the best gyms in Perth by far. He's coaching me with his team directly. I'm doing coaching at least 3 times a week, if not 5 times a week, with him and his team to get myself back on track. And we do daily walks and we eat relatively healthy, but I eat too much. I'm a stickler for eating yummy food. So at least now I am back on track. I am drinking less, I am eating better, and I am training better. And that is the way I am staying healthy and fit so that I can actually be a dad that performs at a high performance with my son as he grows. And I'm not a man that shrivels and dies and is useless and terrible as my son gets better and better. And I'm like, I still want to beat my son in a 100-meter sprint when I'm 60, right? I know I want him to overtake me because I have all the hopes for him to be the most amazing athlete in the world, but we don't know what we're going to get as dads. But I as myself, challenge myself to be fitter and fitter and fitter every single year. So anyway, that's that. And then, of course, my question that I always ask everybody, it's like, what's one question that you secretly wish someone would ask you that you've never been asked before? That's a hard question. I've actually never thought about it. Brenda's actually asked this question to me before, and I really don't know how to answer it. But I suppose, what am I scared of? I mean, people have asked me that question before, of course, but like, what am I actually scared of? Well, I'm actually really scared of just not succeeding and achieving what I believe that I can achieve. I'm also scared of not succeeding and not achieving the things that I don't yet know that I can achieve. I'm also scared of procrastinating. I'm also scared of time wasting. I'm also scared of not doing enough. I'm also scared of not being flexible, to be quite frank. I'm also scared that I'm going to have some neurological condition and therefore deteriorate, and my wife or my son will have to take care of me. There's a lot of things that I'm scared of. So I suppose, I've made one good step, join a gym. So hopefully I'm going to be fit and strong and healthy and flexible. I'm always reading books, so I'm trying to be knowledgeable. I'm always taking calculated risks so I can generate more wealth and obviously become successful, and not just in my eyes, but my son's eyes, but, most importantly, my eyes, because unfortunately, my dad was an amazing human, but he had his flaws. And one of those things was negative self-talk. And that has very, very much rubbed off on me. And now I have negative self-talk. Some things he actually had really positive self-talk, and that was egotistical in the sense. Sometimes he was like, I'm the best in the world at this. It's like, Dad, you're not. And sometimes I have that. And if you know me really well, you know that sometimes I am very egotistical. So there are some things that I need to work on. So I am very, very comfortable in my own skin and comfortable with my successes. And I do see myself as successful. But guys, that is the podcast. That is the show for today. That is the Dad Bob Show. Thank you very much, Ken, for joining us. If you want to check out more about me and find me elsewhere, you can go and find me on Instagram at www.instagram.com/ken.blowfield. You can find me on LinkedIn, ken.blowfield. You can find me on Facebook, ken.blowfield, or just simply Ken Blowfield. If you want to, you can just simply Google me, Ken Blowfield, and I will come up. My name is Ken Blowfield from the Dad Bob Show. Typically, Brendo is here with me, but today it is me interviewing me. Next week, there'll be some other guests. We have some really, really cool people in the lineups. But I just wanted to throw this episode in there for me. Do it for me. Why not? I thought I'd just get on here and have a little bit of a blast. So, guys, have an amazing day. Thank you for tuning into the show, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace out. That's it from us on this episode on the Dad Bob Show. If you want to find out a little bit more about us, head on over to www.dadbob.com. Until next time, see you next week.